think the most impactful lesson I learned, and it took, even though we've always done it this way, it took a long time for me to realize just how important it was to realize that education is discipleship. It's not just the reading and writing and math, which those are the foundation, they're very important, but it's also building a relationship with our kids.
Hi, moms. Welcome to Christian Homeschool Mom Podcast. I'm so glad you're here today. I'm your host, Owens. I'm a wife to James. I'm a mom to 5 amazing children, and I'm a woman that needs God's grace every day. And this is a space where we can come together to encourage, equip, and empower fellow moms who are raising godly children in this ungodly world. Whether you're a parent, a homeschooling mom, or someone seeking inspiration, we hope our experiences resonate with you. We invite you to listen in, reflect on your own story, and perhaps you'll find some encouragement today. We'll dive into practical tips, inspiring stories, and biblical wisdom to help you navigate this beautiful, challenging, and rewarding path. So grab your tea, your coffee, or a glass of water, sit back, and let's grow together in faith. Hi, moms. Today I have a special guest. Her name is Nicki Truesdell. She homeschooled her 5 children through many difficult seasons, including being a single mom, a single working mom, and a mom of multiples in variety of ages. She's an author, blogger, and speaker on homeschooling and Christian parenting. She also wrote a book called Anyone Can Homeschool. Nicki, welcome to this podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today.
Nicki, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience today? Did I miss anything there?
Well, I am now a grandmother. I have 2
Yeah,
grandchildren, so I'm
congratulations.
excited about that. Yeah, they're 3 and 1, and I actually got to spend the last weekend babysitting them, so I'm a little
Ah,
bit tired.
ah,
When your kids grow up and then you have babies over again, but it was so much fun, and I'm loving being a grandmother.
oh, that's so nice. I would love to
It's
see that myself in a few years, you
You
know?
will someday, yes.
Yeah, Lord willing, Lord willing. Nikki, I just wanted you to share your story. Why did you choose to homeschool your children?
Yes, so actually I was homeschooled as a child by when I was 11, my parents learned about homeschooling and decided to try it. So they took me and my sister out of public school well at the end of the year and
Yeah.
chose for the new school year to homeschool us, and that was in 1983. And so it was obviously very different back then, but
Yeah.
it was really neat. I loved growing up homeschooled. It was a lifestyle I really enjoyed. Not only because I enjoyed learning and reading, so I had a lot of unlimited time for that
Yeah.
instead of being on a school schedule, but also our family was a lot closer.
Hmm.
And, we just spent every day together, and every day was different, but it was fun. And I knew before I even graduated that that's what I wanted to do with my kids. And so it wasn't even a decision I had to make. Before I even had kids, I was preparing to homeschool. And so when my oldest was just a preschooler, we started doing learning activities.
Yes.
And, I didn't wait till kindergarten or 5 years old. I just started reading to her as soon as she could listen to me. And we played games and went for walks, just doing all the normal things. But I
Yeah.
realized how much of that was already education.
Yeah.
And so it was natural.
And then Nikki, I was like thinking of the book when I actually heard your book. You said there that your mom actually homeschooled you and she didn't
Mhm.
even finish college. Mhm.
She did not finish high school.
Yeah, she didn't even finish high
Uh,
school and she did it. She was able to do
right.
it.
Yes, so she had me when she was 14 years old and dropped out of high school at that time and never
Yeah.
went back. And so, of course, it seems impossible to homeschool your children if you don't even have a high school
Yes.
diploma, but it's actually not the case at all. And so she was she was mentored by a really sweet couple
Mhm.
who said, if you have this conviction to raise your children different from the world, then
Yeah.
you can do it. It doesn't matter what your education is. You can have, there's so many good materials available. And even back in the 80s, there was still really good Christian homeschool curriculum. And, like I say in my book, if you can read, you can teach. And
Yeah.
my mom could read, she had gotten to the ninth grade. And even if you don't go to school, you still keep learning all the time. And so it was possible. And I went on and graduated, and I went to college myself and did get a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
And that was after having a mom who had only gone to the ninth grade. So that's one of the reasons I say anyone can homeschool, because my mom proved it.
I'll be honest with you, the first time my husband told me, honey, you have to stop working. Because we're both working full time. And our first child
Hmm.
was already 4 at that time. He already kept telling me
Hmm.
about it. And I still like, no. I was totally like against it because I was never homeschooled. I went to the normal,
Right.
public school, private school until I got my degree. So I said like, no, I'm not gonna homeschool. Don't even know anyone who's homeschooling. I totally have no clue of homeschooling. So when I actually heard the story
Yeah.
of your mom, that is inspiring. And I was like, I hope I heard that story when I was like starting, when I was
I
like,
know.
but but still I heard that story just like, few weeks ago, bumps, but it is still inspiring to hear that from someone that if you really want to do it, it is possible.
Yep, it is. Well, that's why I tell it so much, because I think more and more people just need to understand that. And even if you are already homeschooling, I think it's still an encouraging thing to hear that, okay, I might think I'm messing my kids up, but I'm not, it's going to be okay.
Because I think that's one of the hesitation, of some parents that they might think that they might fail their children.
Oh, yeah.
Because I felt that, I felt that kind of like I felt like I'm not qualified to do it. I have no
Yeah.
degree in education, so my degree is different. It's business, it's not education. So I'm not qualified on that. That
Mhm.
you have that mindset that no, because you don't have that degree. No, you can't do it. Only the professionals can do it. What can you add
Right.
on that for
Well,
those moms that feels like that they're not, good enough because
I
of their educational status or skills?
yes, absolutely. Because the people that are homeschooling now, I just would say consider the reason why you started homeschooling in the first place. And for so many of those parents, it was because the public school system was failing their kids.
Mhm.
And if
That's
you
true.
look at statistics for, there's a website called the Nation's Report Card, but there are many others where you can go and look at year by year statistics of what public school kids are learning and what they're not learning. And the results are awful. In across the country, we see 50% or less
Hmm.
proficiency, math and language arts. It's even worse in history and science. So if anybody's failing our kids, it is the public school system. It's not the parents who spend one-on-one time with their kids and can see what they're good at and can see where they struggle and can find a way to, solve some of the problems. The public school system doesn't have the time to do it. They have the money. I don't know what they're doing with all the money, but they have a
That
lot of money to work with,
yes, they
and
do.
they have professionals with degrees and, whatever the latest research is, but what are they doing with all of that information? It's not working. And so that's why I just say, look at the system outside your home and ask yourself, can I do a better job than that? And
Mhm.
usually 100% of the time, the answer is yes, you can do a much better job than they are.
I actually like it. I wrote it down when you said homeschooling, it's not basically a school at home. You said it's a paternal
Mhm.
act of providing an education outside the public or private school. It's about parents taking a driver's seat. I love that when you said that parents taking a driver's seat and overseeing the timetable, the curriculum, and the method. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. Well, what I try to encourage parents to remember is that you're not recreating public school at home.
Mhm.
You are doing something very different. And
Yes.
the faster you realize that, I think the more pleasant your homeschooling days will be, and even your vision
Yeah.
Your priorities will change when you realize we don't need a school administration or a chalkboard or a classroom. We need time, discipleship, good
Yes.
books,
Yes.
and proper conversation. And so that can look about 100 different ways.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking this morning in a conversation, there is not one right way to homeschool
Mhm.
either. There's
Yeah.
so many different ways because
Yes.
every family is different. And so
Exactly.
that's why I say you're in the driver's seat, whether, as a mom and a dad, you choose what your meals are going to be, and they're different from your
Mm.
neighbor's meals. You choose
Yeah.
where you shop for clothes and you choose different Christmas decorations.
Yeah.
Well, that's how homeschool is. You choose what's best for your family, what works for you, and don't worry about what everybody else out there is doing.
I think that's the thing because I noticed that myself when I started to homeschool. I was trying to kind of like create a school at home, you know,
Yeah,
and
I did that.
yeah. So I think we all did that to kind of like, and then I was like very strict, with my routine, with my schedule, that I want this, and there's, then there's friction between yourself and your children and your spouse because
Yes.
you made a plan and it didn't work out the way you planned it, and my husband, whenever he comes home in the evening, I still remember this, and Nikki, whenever he comes home, tired husband, because he's in the building industry, he's in construction,
Mhm.
and he's so tired, and he comes home to a wife that is crying all the time. And so because what happened again today? And then I will just pour out all my thing. I don't know if I can do this. She's not listening and she's not doing this. And then I was like, honey, can you just calm down? What are you expecting her to
Yeah.
do? So I think that's the thing. I love it when you said home education is freedom. I love that when you said
Yes.
that because I became a slave when I was starting homeschooling.
I think that's very common. In fact, like I said, I was that way. My first year as a homeschool mom, I was that way. And it's surprising because I grew up homeschooled, but in our homeschool growing up, it was very scheduled. I wouldn't say strict, but it was easy. My mom had two girls who were already, 8 and 11. So it was easier for us to just go along with the rules and the schedule. And it wasn't
Yeah.
that big of a deal. But when I started, I was still trying to recreate a school
Mhm.
in my home, and it did not work at all for my first child.
Yeah.
And there were so many tears on her part
Uh,
and my part. It was just I just thought, "No, this is supposed to be fun."
yeah.
And it wasn't always.
No.
Sometimes it was, but then some days I just thought, "What are we doing wrong?" And I had to learn from others who had
Yes.
gone before me and learned it's okay to relax this or relax that. Maybe choose a different schedule or a different method. As long as they're learning,
Yeah.
there you can get there so many different ways. And I think it took me 3 or 4 years
Yeah.
to really get comfortable with that idea, and that was obviously a long time ago. That was over 20 years ago, and so
Yeah.
it helped so much, and it changed everything about our homeschooling from that point forward. But it is freedom, but sometimes we're afraid of that freedom. It's too scary to just to venture out on our own and go, I've got a great idea. I'm going to do it this way.
Yeah.
Because we just think, but not how everybody else is doing it. So I don't know. Is that right? I don't know. So you have to embrace the freedom and not be afraid of it.
Yeah. I think that was it. Actually, I just felt the freedom when COVID starts. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah,
Yeah. So when
that's true.
I'll be honest with you, when COVID starts, I kind of like, wow, so I kind of like I became freer, and even my husband noticed it. Yeah,
Interesting.
so this is how we should do it. I'm not like always stressed out. This is the lesson plan. This is what we're going to be doing today. This is our
Yeah.
structure for today.
Because no one else was doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because we were just like, okay, let's go here and there. When
Yeah.
we just kind of like travel here and there and see the different historical place for the children, and
Oh,
we're
wow. I
enjoying
love
it.
that.
So my children love my husband because he's like in the field trip area, and I'm like in the no, 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 no.
Oh, okay.
So kind of
Yeah,
like
that's very common too.
yeah. So he's kind of like
Glad is the
okay,
room for all the fun
yeah.
stuff.
So
Yeah.
he's like the fun part, and I'm like the serious part. But
Yeah.
it all worked out. So
Somebody has to be the series.
yeah, yeah, true, true. So it's kind of like, I think when you enjoy that, there's freedom in a way that one thing that I think before I was like thinking, and I said it many times to my children, I just don't want you to be behind. I just don't want you to be behind. And my husband like, who are they behind? What do you mean behind?
That's perfect.
Have you said
That's what
that?
I say. Behind who? Yes, I've
Yeah.
been saying that for a long time. Behind who? And like again, like I said, the public school system is massively behind. And now in the last couple of years, I don't know how long this has been going on, but their method is not to fail anyone and just to keep passing them through. So no one fails a grade, which I
Hmm.
don't like the whole failing grade thing,
Yeah.
but I also don't like that they just keep pushing kids through to the next level without mastering concepts either. Like, neither
Mm.
one of those is a good way to educate a child. And so I just say behind who because what we're comparing ourselves to
Yeah.
is not doing very well. But the behind idea comes from, well, you've got to master certain things by a certain age or a certain grade level, and
Hmm.
this is how they do it. So if we're not doing it the way they do, then we must be behind. But one thing I think a lot of people don't realize is that just because the school says this is how we do it, it doesn't mean that they're doing that well.
Hmm.
And if, they may have a scope and sequence on their website, that doesn't mean they're following it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I learned this from teachers. So I am not making this up. I learned it from teachers
Hmm.
who are afraid to speak out openly, but they will message me privately.
Yeah.
And they say, I have to give a 50 or above to every student, whether they earned it or not. I cannot give them a 0 on an assignment or a test or their whole grade level because we're not allowed to. So what is that doing for kids? It's teaching them that they just do some work and you'll get past anyway, whether you know the material or not.
Yeah.
And so parents want their kids to learn, and
Yes.
homeschool parents are really concerned about that. So I know there are rare cases, that are kind of on the fringe where the homeschoolers don't actually homeschool, but that is not the norm. And so
Hmm.
in homeschooling, I say, I just don't want you to be behind. It's out of a true concern for education. And I believe that attitude translates into giving your kids a good education. And so I've said for years there's no such thing as behind in homeschooling. And I truly believe that in every case where a parent is actively teaching their children, they're constantly moving forward, whether it's quickly or
Hmm.
slowly, they're not behind. They're still learning every day.
That is true because everything we do in the home, they're learning responsibilities. They're learning how to be, character building is part of that. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
things to learn aside from, of course, we want them to learn how to read, how to write, what is
Yep.
the real history aside from this history, you know what I mean? So, and I think that
Yes.
that's the good thing because I can see that with my children. My oldest is now 14, so she was just 4 when we started homeschooling her. So I can see that when you teach them how to read and write and have the love for learning, they will fly.
Mhm.
So it it,
They
it
sure do.
became it
Yeah.
became easier for me then because I can already leave her and she can do her own thing. And then when she has, she
Yeah.
knows she can come to me if she has questions, if she has things that we need to work together, either it's composition, either it's algebra, and stuff like that. So
Yes.
we can try to work things out. So what do you think, Nikki, are the key qualities or mindsets that make homeschooling possible for anyone, regardless of their background or experience?
Well, the first one I would think is realizing that the public school system isn't the only way, and
Hmm.
it's really not even the best way. Their methods are not efficient, and they're not always producing good results. So don't compare to that. That's
Hmm.
probably my number one piece of advice. Don't compare yourself to what you remember at school.
Yes.
And that's hard, I know, because everybody goes to public school. And so most adults that are homeschooling did go to public school. So that's what we know. But as much as possible, try to throw that picture out of your head and just think, what does my child need to know and how will I give that to them? Um, and so it sounds very simple, but it is. It really is that simple. Just and I'm not saying you have to figure it out from scratch because there's so many great curriculums out there to choose from that will help
Yes.
you do that. Um, and then the second thing is don't worry about the calendar. I usually encourage that. Just um, we think of school as from September to May, Monday through Friday, 8 to 3.
Yes.
Summers off, and that's okay if that's what you prefer in your
Hmm.
homeschool. Then go ahead and do it. But that's not the only way,
Yes.
and especially for people in what I would say not average circumstances, whether it's working parents or single parents or whatever, that letting go of the calendar really helps you to see how possible it is to homeschool for anyone. And so some people do need to have school on the weekends instead
Hmm.
of Monday through Friday, or they do it in the evening
Yeah.
where they go all year round. That's what we do. We just go year round and we take a break whenever we need to.
Yes.
In fact, right now we're having breaks because the weather's nice and my mom is sick and my husband's about to be off work. So it
Yeah.
just makes more sense to
Yes.
take a break right now. And we live in Texas, so the summers are very, very hot and no one wants to go outside. So we will be indoors in the
Yeah.
air conditioning having so
Yeah.
but there's so many different ways to adapt the calendar. That's my point. No matter what your life is, you can adapt your school schedule around it. It doesn't matter what time of day you have school or what day of the week it is.
Yes.
Um and then one of the other things that I say a lot is that it does not take 12 years to educate a child. And I have a blog post on that, and that's actually the subject of my next book that's taking a while. But the gist of that is that the K through 12, 7-hour day system is fairly new in world history. It was invented in the 20th century, so if people would stop and think about how kids were educated all the thousands of years before that,
Yeah.
they would realize that we spend a whole lot of time on school that is full of busy work and fillers, and things that are not necessary for
Yeah.
education.
Hmm.
When if we took all that out, we'd realize, and homeschoolers already realize this, it takes about half the time, half a day instead of a
Yeah.
full day, and not really as many weeks in the year. And so if you can adjust your mind to realizing that and start looking at schoolwork differently and think, is this really necessary? Is this worksheet or this crossword puzzle, is it necessary?
Yeah. Yeah.
And pick and choose along the way and say, I don't think we need this. Or, I mean, I've told my kids in a certain parts of math book, I'll say, you absolutely need to know this for the real world. And then the next day they'll come across something and I say, I'm not really concerned about this one. So you
Yeah.
can skip it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
True.
get to make so you don't need 12 years of 7-hour days to really give your kids a good solid education. And when you realize that, then you stop thinking you're behind and you stop thinking you're going to mess your kids up and you focus on what's really important and help them master the really important concepts instead.
I like that because I have, let's say, today actually my son, he's 8. One of my sons is 8 years old, and he's doing his math, and it's like it has loads of addition and subtraction. And he
Hmm.
said, like, but mom, I already have done this page yesterday. There's like 3 more pages. It's the
Yeah.
same thing. And then I kind of like check. And he was okay. I mean, he got the gist of it. He knows how to add. He knows how to subtract. Oh,
Yeah.
that's okay. Let's move on to the next thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you understood
Yeah.
how to add on, if you understood that part, you understood this part, then you're fine. You understood the concept of it. It's different
Yeah.
if you have loads of mistakes. You know what I mean? But he got it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just it's
You
too
got it. And it's
much
going to keep
sometimes.
coming up in his lessons anyway. So
Yeah,
it's not like he'll never add one. He will
exactly.
practice it constantly.
Yeah, 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 exactly. And I like when you
It's
said the calendar.
just
That's
making
good.
it that executive decision. You
Mm.
just have to go, you know what, I'm in charge here and I'm
Yeah,
gonna make decisions that I think yes. That's what it's all about.
I think that's the good thing because as a mom, you know your children. You know them better.
Yeah.
And I always say this to moms: like, no one can love your children than you do. No one knows your children. You know what they're doing. You know what
Mhm.
to expect from them. I love when you said that calendar because it's a freedom again, you know? So
It
it's
is.
a freedom again when I actually kind of
Yeah.
learned that calendar thing because before I thought I have to follow, oh, we call it here in Ireland, bank holiday, the holidays,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
so these are the holidays, so we have to follow it. But then again, next thing I learned, you can actually study the whole year and then take off when you need it to go, and
Exactly.
so why
Yeah.
follow that where you can go to the park and it's only your family in the park because the rest are in school,
Oh,
you know?
that is a big deal, actually.
You know?
That's what here in the States, we have homeschool day at the zoo and homeschool day at the park, and I always say, "Don't go then, that's when everybody's
Yeah.
there. Go when everyone's at school, even the homeschoolers." You
Yeah.
know, you're on an off day, and you have the whole place to yourself.
Exactly. When I bring my children, when I bring my children, it's only our family there at the big park. There were days that we went there like the
Exactly.
weekend and it's packed. So I said, oh, no,
Uh-huh.
no, no. So we go on a different day. We'll go to and we just own the park ourselves, so it's so cool.
Yes.
Even the library, when you go there in the time that
Yeah.
everyone is in school, you're the only people
It
there. Your
different.
family's the
We
only.
were thrilled to that, actually.
Yeah, so that's one of the beauty of homeschooling. I know you wrote
It
the book,
is.
the Anyone Can Homeschool, which is the book that I mentioned earlier, moms, and I would really recommend it even if you already started homeschooling because it's just so inspiring to hear different families that whatever reason, it's still they were able to homeschool. So there's loads of testimonies there from different families. I know you already shared a bit there about your mom. Can you share a little bit more and the story behind writing that book, Anyone Can Homeschool? What inspired you to write that?
Well, what inspired me was constantly talking to other parents who wanted to homeschool, but they thought they couldn't because of, some circumstance, whether they didn't have the money to quit a job
Yeah.
or whether they wanted to keep working or single parents. Sometimes I talked to parents who had special needs children, or maybe there was chronic illness in the family.
Yeah.
Um, there's so many reasons that people think, "Oh, I couldn't do that because, my life isn't perfect enough, so I couldn't." And
Yeah.
I kept saying, "Yes, you can." And because it was based on what I had already been through. I had already been a single mom. I had worked full time and I'd worked part time and homeschooled, and I've had migraines since I was a child, and those, you know, kind of knock out a whole day for you
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
get one. And moved a lot, lived below the poverty level a couple of times. And so but I kept homeschooling because
Yeah.
I just thought where there's a will, there's a way. And I kept doing it. And so I had a bunch of years behind me of doing it with those circumstances that other people were bringing up. And so I'd say, yeah, you can do this. I can tell you how because I did it.
Mhm.
And then I also was meeting more and more parents who had also figured out a way despite their hard circumstances. And so I just kept telling people, yes, you can. You can do it. Anyone can do this.
Yeah.
And sharing it online, and I would write it on my blog. And my husband finally said, you should just write a book so that you can just give the book out, instead of
Yeah.
having to repeat your answers all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, that's silly." But then I thought, "That's a really good idea." And
Yeah.
so I started working on it, and I published it in 2020, and it is to basically help people see, all the different ways that homeschooling happens. And like you said, I interviewed a lot of different families for the book so that
Yeah.
they could tell their story. Because like I said, there's so many ways to do it. I did it one way, and other
Yeah.
families figured out different approaches to special needs or working or parents who have just one child at home or, grandparents who homeschool. There's so many different ways. And I
Mhm.
wanted people to hear from others. And
Yeah.
so I started the book by just explaining, some of those concepts that you asked about earlier. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need 12 years. You don't want to copy the public school. But then I interviewed the other parents to say, "Tell me your story of how you figured out anyone can homeschool."
Yeah.
And so it was just basically the way to get that message out to more and more people who desperately wanted to get their kids out of public school, but didn't think there was a way. And so I'm really glad that it's out there and it's gotten a lot of good feedback. I published that in 2020, so it's been 5 years.
Yes, and still encouraging until today. So I really love it how you interview those families because every family is different. We can't just
Yep.
say this is what works for me. So this is the best thing that will work for you because it works for me this way, so we can see that,
Right.
yeah, maybe your husband is working, you know what I mean? And then you're the one that's not working or you're working part-time. We can still do it this way. So there's no really
Mhm.
specific way because every family is
Right.
unique. So, everyone is unique, every family is different. So I love how you did that because that kind of like give perspective to other families. Oh, this is like me. This is me. So this is they
Yeah.
were, yeah. So there's kind of
Just
like
to
a
see the
picture.
flexibility, I think. Yeah.
Mm.
It helps to see how flexible homeschooling actually is.
And going back to your story and Nikki, in your own homeschooling journey, can you talk about any specific struggles that you face as a homeschooling mom and how your faith has helped you
Oh, boy.
overcome it? Yeah.
Yes.
I would love to hear
Lots of
that.
struggle. Well, early on, when I started homeschooling my oldest, when she was about to turn 6 years old and my youngest was 2, I actually had to run away from an abusive husband. So that's probably my biggest obstacle to overcome. And I actually avoided that for a while because, it's easier to stay than it is to run away and start over. And I have a
Mhm.
lot of sympathy for women in that situation because I know how hard it is to leave the security of at least having a home, and
Yeah.
something that you know. But I had to go. And so one day I just made the decision and we packed up everything we had and left before he came home from work. And literally hid for a while so that he wouldn't know where we were.
Mhm.
And so you can imagine that homeschooling was not top priority at that time.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we were basically 1 year into official homeschooling, after kindergarten.
Yeah.
And I had to survive.
Yeah.
I had to
Yes.
figure out how we were going to live and eat.
Yeah.
And those are the basic things that we had to
Yes.
do. And so education wasn't happening at that time. And then it became sporadic. I had to work and
Mhm.
I had to hire a babysitter. And so we gradually began adding more schooling back to our days. But the one thing that I knew I wasn't going to do was send them to public school. And so I had to figure out what are the alternatives?
Yes.
What do I do now if we're not
Yes.
going to public school and we're not doing daycare? And so it was a trial and error process, working around my work schedule and, the emotions that come up after a family has been through something like that.
Yeah.
My kids felt that
Yeah.
they cried or they acted out. And so I had to be their mom and tried to be their teacher too. And way back then is when I learned that. I mean, I didn't learn it for a while, but I started not having school every day and
Mhm.
realizing they were still learning and that it didn't take all the time that we thought it did to get an education. And I would say there was 3 or 4 years there of solid chaos, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
like no schedule, just here and there, and my poor first daughter was definitely the guinea pig, but not on purpose,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just life. But when things started to settle down after 3 or 4 years, I remarried. We had a home.
Yeah.
I was still working part-time and, you know, we started to get a more normal schedule and I realized that they were not behind,
Yeah.
they were easily able to catch up some things that they'd missed. And I realized there are not as many gaps between the grade levels as people think there are.
Yes.
And, way back then was when I was introduced to Sally Clarkson at a homeschool
Oh.
conference, and
Yeah.
she has such a sweet way of just
Yes.
sharing, "Hey, you can do this, it's okay, and just read a lot of good books," and,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, that's how long ago 20 years ago is when I was
Mhm.
introduced to her, and she really helped me to just relax. And
Yes.
then the idea of relaxed homeschooling just kinda kept showing up here and there when I would read things, and I realized that, I didn't have to be a slave driver, and we didn't have to back up to 2nd grade and do all these books to catch up. Just start where you are.
Yeah.
Um, I think those years were really the years that solidified everything that I say now.
Mhm.
And a after that, I would see, fast forwarding a few more years, I would see that my daughters could easily pick up where we'd left off. And my second daughter didn't even start learning to read until she was about 8 years old, partly because of, life and chaos, but also
Mhm.
because we just didn't get around to it. But when we did start, she learned fast.
Yeah.
And she also had to start in math because of our life circumstances. But when we did start it, she picked it up so quickly. I just thought, wow, she's
Wow.
accomplished like 2 years math
Yeah.
in 6 months.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started going, oh, this is interesting. I'm learning a lot of interesting things about education now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so as the years went by, just more and more of that. And through those years, we still had either very little money to spend on curriculum, or I was on bed rest each time I got pregnant, and all the different things that
Yes.
you just go, ah, things are not working perfectly,
Yes.
but nothing ever did. Nothing ever worked out perfectly, and they still got an education.
Mhm.
Anyway, those two daughters are grown adults now. They well educated. They both have chosen not to go to college, but they are well read and well rounded. And I am so thankful. I just think it's the grace of God that allowed me to keep pushing forward, and that encouraged me not to give up, but just to keep trusting in Him and keep doing what I knew to do.
Yes.
And everything got all right. And it's really with those two first daughters that I learned so much about homeschooling in difficult circumstances. And then I applied it to the next three kids along the way. And it's proved to be true
Yeah.
time and time again.
Totally agree with you. So, because I've done it with my first child, so we don't want them to be the guinea pig, but it's like that, so you're kind of like, wow, was able to do like in 2 years that someone can, study that. She was able to do it in a year.
Yeah.
Kind of like,
Right.
wow. And then I was like, when she was already old enough, I told her, yeah, really, mommy? I go, yeah, you've done it. Wow. I didn't
Yes.
even know that. So it's kind of like when you see that we all have struggles in homeschooling. Like I said
Hmm.
earlier, I was like crying every night whenever my husband comes home from work.
Yes.
So, and then we learn from it, so
I
it's
think people
beautiful.
probably, yeah, I think people don't realize that almost every family has some kind of struggle,
Yeah.
and they just may not talk about it publicly,
Yeah.
but every family has something going on. Um, and if we compare to what we see, that obviously makes us feel like we're doing something wrong, but we don't always see everything. And so, um, life on this earth is, it's a fallen world, and nobody's life is perfect. But you just trust in God and keep doing what you know to do, and God blesses that. I believe that.
Yes. Well, I believe that too. You just do the best you can, the best of your ability, the best
Mm.
of what you have. And yeah, God will definitely bless it. I totally believe that.
He will.
And when you mentioned Sally Clarkson, she was actually
Yeah.
one of those authors that I think I have nearly all of her books, because
I do.
I was at that time that I said to you, I don't know anyone homeschooling. I'm here in Ireland.
Oh,
So when my husband told
mm,
me to homeschool, I said, I don't know anyone homeschooling. What is homeschooling? Tell me,
oh,
So I have no clue. And then we were able to research, there's a group here in Ireland called ICHEA, it's called Irish Christian Home Educators Association,
oh,
which is
good.
good that we were able to go at that time because now they're not that busy, very
Uh-huh.
silent now. But before, this is like way like 10 years ago, when the president was different, it was really
Mhm.
active. You know what I mean? So, and I'm glad I was like during at that time, I was able to meet other families. It was a 3-day conference, and that's how I met other families. Like, oh, there's people
Good.
homeschooling, So I think that's
Yes,
that's it's a good thing to learn from other people. And
it is.
when it became quiet, I just go through and yeah, I've heard of Sally Clarkson, and then I kind of like, wow, she has these books, from 24 Family Ways to the Mission of Motherhood to the Life Giving Tables. I
Yeah.
kind of like it is because you kind of like leaning on to this uh,
Mhm.
women that had struggles, So when I met you as well, and I've heard your story, it is inspiring what your mom have done because if you don't know moms, Nikki, your mom was arrested and your dad, they were arrested. You share that in your book.
Yes.
How
Yes.
did you feel that
They were
time? Yeah.
it was scary. I was 11 years old, and we were only a few weeks into homeschooling when it happened.
Yeah.
And we were in a state where it was legal, but no one knew it because no one was homeschooling. And so we just seemed odd. And so it was a really small town, and someone called the police, and they came to our door and arrested my parents for truancy. Um, and so, yeah, it was a little unnerving, but
Yeah.
they were, I mean, God worked miracles that day because there were homeschool lawyers already, you know, already looking into the legality of homeschooling in different states.
Yeah.
And so they got wind of what was happening that day. They made some calls, and by the end of the day, my parents were released from the jail and sent home. And then a few months later, the charges were dropped.
Mhm.
But it did help me to understand the importance of, legal homeschooling and
Yes.
fighting for the right
Yes.
to. And of course, my parents were obviously affected by that. They
Yes.
didn't stop homeschooling at all, but it made
Yeah.
them see too how important it was to keep those freedoms.
Exactly. Because I even met some moms that, they don't know about homeschooling. And then they would ask me, when we go, for example, sometimes we go to a protest, Nikki. So I'll be honest with you, just to fight for the freedom of this country. So it's kind of like
Absolutely.
we
Absolutely.
meet then other families, and then when they see my children, and they would say like, so which school do they go to? And me and my
Right.
husband would be like, okay, so the same thing again, is always like, we're homeschooling, so, and they would be like,
Yeah.
you're homeschooling, and some of them they didn't
What?
know that it is legal to homeschool. I mean, can you
Yeah.
homeschool? So I think that's one thing. You mentioned in your book that you need to know the law. So you can
Yes.
actually understand that.
Yeah. I mean, I do encourage you to stick to the laws, but
Mm.
also fight for better ones all the time. If
Yes.
if your country or your state is not free, fight for it to be free. And in the meantime, obey the law, so that you're not arrested. But it's a parental right, and
Yeah.
we should all have that. It's our God-given command
Yes.
to be the first teachers and the first disciplers of our children.
Oh, I love that when you said that, Nikki, because the verses that really spoke to me when I started to homeschool was Deuteronomy 6:4-7. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And then Moses said there, and this commandment shall be in your heart. And then you shall teach them to your children diligently. That's the thing that really opened my eyes. And until now, it's like
Yes.
fresh as yet, just yesterday that it happened, although that's like 10 years ago. I was like on my way to work, Nikki, because I was like thinking, how can we pay the mortgage if I'll be stopping to work, So financially, can we afford it? Me and my husband were like talking about, and my husband said to me, if we will lose this house, we will lose it. But I don't want us to lose our children. So he was like
Wow.
so strong. And I'm the one that's kind of like shaky, in that
Mhm.
thing because he's been telling it to me for like a year already. And I'm like, no, no. I said, do you want to homeschool? I'll stay working. So there were like discussion like that. So, but yeah, but
Well,
when God opened my eyes on that verse, it just totally, I surrendered to the Lord's will after that. Sorry, I cut you there,
yeah.
Nikki.
No, I was just gonna say that when God asks us to do something, he also makes a way to do it. And
Yes.
it doesn't always look like the way we think it will, but
Yeah.
he does make a way. And if I was to look, I mean, when I look back at my many years of homeschooling, the way I had to do it sometimes is not what I would have chosen. I would not have chosen the rocky periods and being broke sometimes and,
Mhm.
things like that. I wouldn't have chosen that if I'd known, but I just kept moving through it, and God always made a way. We never went without anything. We never went without a home or food or clothes.
Yes.
And but I will never regret spending all that time with my children. I will never regret that I had every moment with them that I did, instead of saying, you know, people say, "Well, you only have 18 summers with your kids." And I just think, why would you only want the summers?
Yeah.
You can have 18 years, their whole childhood. And
Yeah.
I did. I'm so thankful for that. I have no regrets unless it was just that I could use the time even better than I did.
Yes.
But yeah, when I look at all the other things that I didn't have, they don't matter,
Yeah.
because I had my kids and I still have them. So that's we have to look at the big picture and houses and cars and vacations and all that. That's not the most important thing. And
Mm.
and I know it's really hard to
Right.
to have that mindset. It's very hard. I won't pretend that it's not, but I can just tell you looking back on my life, I'm grateful for everything we went through and grateful that I spent all those years with my children.
Thank you for confirming that, because it is encouraging
Sure.
to hear it from, the older women that have gone through this road of homeschooling,
Mhm.
because those were my fears before, how can we
Yeah,
how
it's
can
normal.
yeah, so how can we do that, it kind of like we're already like sometimes we're not even breaking even, so then if
Yeah.
I'm not going to be get, but God provided until now, we
Yes.
still have our home. Thank you, Lord.
Yes.
So we still have food on the table, which is the main thing. And our children are so close to us, which I'm so
Mhm.
thankful. I'm
Worth
so
it.
thankful. Yeah, it's so worth it. So those books that I've read, I'm kind of like, oh, that is actually so true. So
It is.
you were seeing there, and it's a different relationship between you and your children. What can you say about
Mhm.
your relationship with your, just to encourage these moms that's starting in homeschooling? How is your relationship now with your children?
Oh, I love it because for my grown kids, now we're friends, and we're very close because we didn't have that disconnect throughout all their school years where we only saw them in the evenings and on the weekends.
Yeah.
We did everything together and my kids are all close to each other too. And so they spend time together even without me or their dad. They'll just get together and do things because they have a close relationship. Even the teenagers with the grown-up kids, they enjoy each other's company and um my 19-year-old son still lives at home, and so occasionally he'll walk in and out while we're doing school with the teenagers, and he will say, "Oh, I remember that lesson. I wish I had time to sit down and do that with you." So I really like that. I like to hear that feedback because sometimes kids don't like school, and I
Yeah,
get
yeah.
that. But when they grow up, they have those memories and they look back with appreciation and say, "I'm so glad that you taught me that. I'm so glad that we spent the time doing that. That was so much fun." And so I would encourage moms right now, if your kids don't want to do school or they complain, just keep going because it'll get better. Teenagers act that way, young kids will act that way. But if you keep going and doing it with love and consistency, they will grow out of the immature years and they'll
Mhm.
thank you for it.
Thank you very much for that, Nikki. Nikki, I
Yeah.
know we have like not a lot of time, but I really have lots of questions here for you. But what do you think, Nikki, if you can share, what do you think sometimes are the biggest misconception about homeschooling?
The number one misconception is that we don't make friends.
Yeah.
Do they ask you in Ireland, what about
Yeah.
socialization?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, it's universal, I
Mhm.
guess. That's been the number one question since I was a homeschool kid, and it's still happening. I just laugh and say, "Well, we don't lock them in the dungeon all day." So,
Yeah.
they get to come out of the basement sometimes. But honestly, the misconception that they don't meet people is weird because we still leave our house, we still
Exactly.
go to the store, go to the restaurant, we go to church, we have homeschool groups where they meet other kids, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
so it's weird because I just think, what exactly are these people picturing when they ask that question? Like,
Yeah.
the kids are chained to the chair or to the table and they never get to leave. But no, our kids make friends, and um, my second daughter is married to another homeschool graduate, and so
Ooh.
that worked out okay. you know,
Yeah.
my kids all get part-time jobs when they're teenagers, and so they live in the real world even though they just don't go to public school. That's one of the misconceptions. And another one, is that they will not receive a good solid education and be able to get into college, but that's obviously not true. I mean, I was homeschooled in the '80s and I went to college, and it's even more true today. In fact, many colleges are seeking out homeschool graduates because of their ability to learn independently and to work. They have maturity and just the ability to govern themselves better.
Yeah.
And they earn scholarships and can go to college for free. They go in the military. And in my area, I've been homeschooling so long that I know so many homeschool graduates. And in the very small town where I live, there are multiple married couples that where the mom and the dad both graduated from homeschooling, got married, now they're raising a family, and most of them own their own businesses. And so I would just say, if you think that they're not getting a good education, it's such a misconception, because they're well educated and well rounded, and they don't just go and get a job. Sometimes they're the ones hiring someone else for a job. And so
Yes.
it's really fun to see that progression over the decades, that homeschoolers are very entrenched in society, and you might not even realize how many homeschool graduates that you encounter, out in public. So yeah, they're getting a good, strong education.
Remember the socialization. It is funny, okay? We have one friend that came to our house and he brought a friend with him, okay? And then when we were talking on the table, and of course, she asked, so, so your children are being homeschooled? Yes. And so how do they socialize? That's like the question. And I
Ah,
said, no, they don't. He said, they're just here in the kitchen. I just tie them in the rope and stay there for the whole day, So, but I was like joking, and my husband looked at me like, oh, she's not happy with that question again. Because I kind of like every time that you kind of like, how do they socialize? Like, no, I'm just joking. No, they go out now and again. They meet other people
right.
now and again, So in the real world, like, I mean, you
We talk
don't
to humans.
yeah, you don't just meet people the same age as you when you go out. You meet babies,
Right.
you meet grandparents, you meet uncles and brothers, different ages.
Yes.
I think, which is another thing that you only have to socialize with those children that are the same age as
Right.
you are, which is insane sometimes to think. Because in the real world, you meet other people. And I've seen like
Exactly.
my children, wherever I bring them, they can talk to grandparents. They can talk when they see babies. You go to the park, you go everywhere, so they are pleasant to be with. And that's not me saying it because I'm the mom, but because those people around us have seen it. There were times we were in
Yes.
the restaurant, Nikki, and we were waiting for our food and we're all just like chatting, chatting. And then one dad actually came to me because, he saw five children, around me, so, and my husband was like, was there ordering the food and I'm there with five children with babies and all, and we're just like
Uh-huh.
chatting. And he actually came to me and said to me, are these all your children? I said, yeah. And he said to me, I'll be honest with you, they're the most behaved children I've ever seen. And it didn't happen
Yeah.
to us only once. It happened again and again
Mhm.
whenever we are in restaurants that they would notice our
Yeah.
children, how their behavior is, so
We've had the same thing
Mhm.
happen even when ours were young and
Yeah.
babies, like you said. 5 kids at the table at the restaurant, and it shocks people, and we've
Yeah.
had people come up to say, "Wow, I'm so surprised."
Yes.
And so it was nice for our kids to hear that, because it was sort of a reward to them that a stranger would notice that they were being well behaved. So
Yeah. And I said to
then it
them,
feels
well
better.
done.
Mom.
Yeah, I know. He was like saying, it's a credit to you. So I go, oh, thank you very much. So,
I'll
and
you.
yeah, and sometimes from there, a conversation starts, So my
Yeah,
husband is very good in conversation. We're homeschooling them, So then
yeah,
conversation starts on and on and on. But you can see that our children, this conception that they can socialize is totally a myth, it's not
it
a
is.
real thing. And I know throughout your homeschooling journey, I know for 20 years you have loads there and Nikki to share. But what is one of the most impactful lessons you've learned throughout this journey that you would share to our audience today?
I think the most impactful lesson I learned, and it took even though we've always done it this way, it took a long time for me to realize just how important it was to realize that education is discipleship. It's not just the reading and writing and math, which those are the foundation, they're very important, but it's also building a relationship with our kids so that we can disciple them, so that we can influence them for eternity, not
Wow.
just for graduation.
Yes.
And so whenever we have those deep conversations from any lesson, I say take the time to follow rabbit trails, to answer their questions, close the book and talk about what they want to, or, go do some more research that they're interested in, and take the time to disciple them and not just give them assignments. I think um, I was able to learn that many years ago, and it's, to me, those are the most fun times, in school, when we kind of sit back and start talking about a subject that we read about, but it's also some of the most memorable for them and the most important. That's really the heart of education, is discipleship, and it's getting deeper than just lessons. It's talking about the real world, and whatever that happens to be that day,
Hmm.
it's important.
I love
So I
that.
think that's probably the important thing.
I love that, Nikki, because that took me a while to realize that too. So that
Yeah. Well,
that
because public school isn't that way. So
Mhm.
we have to just kind of rethink the whole thing, and that takes some time.
Yes, yes, because that is so true, moms. I've learned that as well after a few years, so
Mhm.
that it is education is really discipleship. You're shaping the heart of your children. You're shaping their mind. You're giving them biblical worldview. So
Mhm.
you're giving that to your children. I'm so enjoying
Mhm.
this, Nikki. Wish we can have like loads of time in here, but I would love to have a
I
part
know.
two of this. And
Yeah, let's
Nikki,
do that.
yeah, is there anything else you would like to share to other moms before we end this podcast?
I just want to encourage any parents that if you're not homeschooling and you've always thought about it, jump in. Just take the plunge, and it might feel like you're jumping off into the deep end. That's okay. You'll float to the top and you'll figure
Mhm.
it out. But get engaged with some other homeschoolers around you. Get to know some more people that are doing it, and have a community. But don't be afraid to start now, because you will be so glad you did, and you'll wish you had done it sooner.
Thank you for that. Nikki, while you were saying that, I actually something popped into my mind. What advice can you give for those moms, okay, that they have children that, for example, in primary years, like,
Uh-huh.
and also in secondary years, we call it their secondary, you call it their high school, that they want to
Uh-huh.
start homeschooling them, but the children, they don't want to be homeschooled, either because they have friends in the school that's really close to them and they would feel like they don't want to you know they don't
Mhm.
want that friendship to end, or they don't want to miss their friends. What would be your advice to those moms that are thinking of homeschooling but their children, they don't want to do it?
That's a good question. I've seen this a lot, and I would say that it's important to do what you feel God has called you to do, and
Mm.
sometimes the kids are a little slower to respond to that, but you're the parent, and so you are the one to make the wise decisions for your kids, and I think it's important just to explain to them that, I feel that this is what's best for our family. It's what God is calling us to do,
Mhm.
and He will bless it. And I want you to enjoy it. I want you to be happy, but we are going to choose this route.
Yes.
And then do your best to make it a fun thing. And school isn't always fun for kids, but there are ways to make it enjoyable.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I recommend for someone who's starting is to de-school. And by that, I just mean kind of throw out all your ideas of public school and start out slow, and start out with some fun hands-on things, so that it doesn't feel like, oh, we went from public school to homeschool classroom. And so I always say start with maybe a good book and study it together, or watch movies together for a whole week, just things that the kids are not expecting at all, and bake cookies and go to a museum,
Yes.
and start with a bang. and say, now this is how homeschooling looks. It's very different from public school. And kind of, with kids, you got to draw them in and
Yeah.
then slowly build up to having a full curriculum. You don't have to have the full curriculum on day one, but you can still be educating and learning through so many other means. And I talk about that in the book more on deschooling. But, you know, convince them that this is what God wants us to do, and then do your best to make it a fun transition so that they don't hate it.
Thank you very much, Nikki, for that. And where can they find you, Nikki?
Well, I have
Yeah.
a website that is just my name, nickitruesdell.com. And I have Facebook and Instagram, and I'm on X, so you can find me on all those platforms. And I have a podcast now too, and it's on Spotify, Apple, most of the places where you get your podcast. And it's
Yeah.
also just my name, the Nicki Truesdell podcast. I'm
Lovely.
only about 10 episodes in, so just started. And then the book Anyone Can Homeschool is available on Amazon, so and Audible and Kindle, so you can get it in 3 different editions if you like.
Oh,
So I think that's all.
yeah. Thank you very much, Nikki. So, moms, if you find this podcast helpful, can you please share it to a mama friend of yours and like this podcast? Leave a comment. We would love to hear from you. Let's share this so we can reach more moms and encourage them in this wonderful journey of training our children in the ways of the Lord. Nikki, thank you so very much for your time. I would love you to pray for our moms if you don't mind.
Yes. Dear Lord, we just thank you for this time to get together and talk about homeschooling our children and raising them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And I pray
Yes.
for everyone that listened today, Lord, that you would bless them and encourage them in this motherhood journey.
Yes.
And Lord, if you're calling them to homeschool, I pray that you would just give them that boldness and confidence that they can do it
Amen.
and equip them. And Lord, help them to find a community near them, just at least one other friend who's doing it to encourage them along the way.
Yes.
And I pray blessings over each of these families, Lord, that you would just help their children to be world changers too.
Yes.
In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, Nikki, thank you very much for your time. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. Okay, thanks,
You're
Mom,
welcome.
again. I enjoyed it too. Thank you, mamas, and I'll see you again next week. God bless. Bye-bye.